Hello and welcome to the NMCA Way. Michael Chekhov on the Three Sister Sensations. I am Lisa Dalton. I am one of the co-founders of the National Michael Chekhov Association, and it is my privilege to be here with...
Hi, I'm Wil Kilroy, another co-founder of the NMCA, and I'm going to start us off because this is Chekhov on your feet. So it's to give you a little practical experience with the Chekhov tools. And one of the great things about these tools is that they work individually for you. So I'm going to ask you to engage your imagination. There's no right or wrong to it, no right way. So don't judge it, just try it, and we're going to see what happens. So what I'd like you to do is to pick up a prop. And since we are on camera, just hold the prop at about camera level. It can be anything, a pen, I've got a little jar, a book, could be anything. But then what I'd like you to do is look up away from the camera. So just look upwards. And now what I'd like you to do is gently and slowly allow your eyes to start to fall towards the object. It'll most likely mean your chin also has to fall as your eyes fall onto the object. And imagine that falling starts to permeate your entire body. So the fall starts to happen into your throat, down into the chest, into the heart area. You're falling down into the stomach and you're gaining a falling sensation. You're falling in your pelvis, thighs, knees, shins, ankles, feet. You're falling, you're giving way to gravity. And just go with that fall, but your eyes are on this object. And with your imagination and every part of you just falling into this object, just be aware of what that's doing for you. If there's been a change, if there's any sort of a feeling, or maybe a situation that arises with this object in your imagination because you're viewing it through this sensation of falling. And just take a moment with that. And then what I'd like you to do is keep your eye focus and your head focus where it is, but now lift your prop up above out of your focus. So your focus is still down, now it's in that empty space, and your prop is above you. And because we work with all directions with any of these three sisters, I'd like you to start falling up towards your object. It's still a fall, but you can fall up. And your eyes are falling up towards the object, and your chin is falling upwards. And again, your whole body is falling up. The heart is falling upwards to this object. And again, look at it with this full body sensation of falling and see if any sort of feeling comes, or if your imagination gives you anything different now in the way you're viewing this, or what this object might even mean at this point, as you've fallen upward to gaze and examine it. And then just let that go. There are two other sister sensations to work with, but I'll let my colleagues work with those. So just shake that away and let it go. And we're going to move on to Brad, who will continue.
The sister sensation that I'm going to work with is balance. So I want you to, first of all, allow your or stand neutral and allow your head on top of your spine, the head, your skull that's at the top of your spine. Close your eyes, get grounded in terms of your feet being about shoulder width apart. Breathe deeply, ground yourself, and think about the way in which your skull balances on top of your spine. Just visualize that for a second. And then let a sense of the top of your skull being a little bit heavier move just a touch to one side. And then move just a touch to the other side. So that, and feel that a little bit, move back and forth so that you can be aware of how your skull is balanced on top of your spine. And the balance, the issue of balance that we're talking about, the way that we're rotating roughly on this joint, can be done in any joint. You could balance inside of any joint. Balance seems to have an issue that has to do with, or seems to deal with an issue that has to do with precipitously falling, losing control, losing the notion of being specifically in control. And it's less the idea of what we want to try and examine is less the idea of losing control, but the notion of mobility within the confines of the joints. So think about balance in terms of what seems natural as you stand in your neutral pose, but then also do something to the balance, moving it one way or the other, to one arm at the shoulder, and then the other arm at the shoulder, maybe forward and backward at the shoulder. Just feel the sense of balance. Feel the sense of how much balance is an issue for the internal part of your body, for your skeletal frame, for the frame of the character that you're performing, the way that you're choosing to perform it, so that you can play with issues that have to do with balance in terms of each of these joints, each of the major joints that are there inside of your skeleton, as part of your skeleton. So for instance, your head at the top of your spine, or your arms at the ends of your shoulder joints, or the part of your spine that is at the top of your pelvis. Play with the balance. Move your upper spine, for instance, to the left or to the right, or forward or back in relation to what's underneath it. Play with that notion of balance. And searching in this way, exploring in this way, can help you find a pose or a physicality that you feel like you want to permanently install as part of the way that you envision, image your imaginary body, your characterization, the thing that you're doing with your physicality, so that you can just drop into your character pose, drop into your psychological gesture. And now I'm going to pass it on to Joanne.
I'm back in balance. So I'll work with the element, the sister of floating and floating up. But same with this, where I'd like for you to start the floating feel is in the jaw. So feel like your jaw is slowly opening and floating back, and really feel a sense of floating in the cranium, almost like if your head were like a jigsaw puzzle and it's starting to slowly float away. Engage the eyes and notice how the eyes can now start to kind of float from focus or float into focus. You really want to use the floating idea of focusing. So now that when you look at the world is floating with you, right? So there's a sense of floating, opening up the jaw, opening up the cranium, and then opening up the eyes, having the way we see float with us. So everything that we're looking at is also in a state of floating with us. And at the same time, you can also just release the chest, open it up the chest, open up the rib cages. They start to expand in a floating way. Don't forget the jaw, don't forget the eyes, don't forget the cranium. As we move down, feel your pelvic bones. And it's almost like if one pelvic bone floats in this direction, the other pelvic bone floats in the other direction. And the pelvic bones are now connected to your floating scalp, your floating head, right? These floating parts are being kind of tethered together by dental floss. And so the same is, it's almost like everywhere your joints are, your elbows, your wrists, here they start to float apart from each other. So you're actually disconnected from your joints, and then from the hips into the knees, into the ankles, so that even as you try to lift your foot, right, there is no joint there. It's all floated apart. So all the parts of your body, specifically your head, your pelvic bones, and your ankles are all tethered together by dental floss. It's the only thing that's keeping you held together. And as you're walking around in this kind of dental floss state, your eyes are almost floating out of your body as well. And it's almost like they have to be connected back into your body. And now as you look at something, now you can bring yourself in, but everything is just being together, held together by a very thin string.
While you're in that floated state, held together by just the thinnest of strings, imagine how the breath is just the same, connected to you. It is floating through you. And imagine that you can allow a sound of a number or a letter of the alphabet float out and move itself through the space.
1, 2, 3,
A,
4,
Brazil.
5,
ah,
6,
Flint.
7,
Blue.
8,
Blue.
X,
9,
Blue.
10.
and now imagine that this string gets tighter. It starts to shrivel and shrink, and it pulls all those pieces closer together, tighter and harder. So tight that the entire body begins to tremble. The struggle for balance, the teetering, the physical expression of losing your balance, of struggling, battling not to fall and not to float away. It's holding the tension between yielding and floating away. And now imagine that softens its physical expression, but the tension on that string, that fine little dental floss, is a tight secret in those joints. And yet it affects the breath. And now with small, subtle, balancing movements, imagine the sound wave is balancing. There's a tight string between each sound, the letter of the alphabet, the number. Maybe simultaneously you pick up that prop you had with Wil and you speak to it, letting the breath struggle.
1, 2,
Shine.
3,
1,
Oh.
4,
5,
5,
Red.
6,
Red.
7.
Now there's a
Blue.
looseness that starts to come into that string, and everything that connects it begins to flop, begins to yield. Instead of battling gravity, it gives into gravitational support. The breath, especially. And it can go in any direction. It falls to the right, falls to the left. It falls up. It falls down. One falls up and it falls in love. And it It's your eyes fall on that object, your hand falls on that object, the breath speaks to the object. 1,
2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And now you continue your conversation, but a sense of finding complete balance starts to come in. The levitational lift, float counters the gravitational pull, and the body arrives at a perfect balance, conflict-free, perfect balance in the thinking forces, feeling forces, willing forces, perfect balance in the gravitational and levitational pull, and perfect balance with your object as you perfectly balance back into your seats, and you conclude with a little goodbye to your object in perfect balance. Goodbye. Thank you so much for helping us with our Chekhov On Your Feet and joining us on your feet with the 3 Sister Sensations. That concludes our section of the On Your Feet.
My favorite person is...
One minute on your imaginary bodies.